I've been on an early 2000s anime kick recently. Death Note remains one of my all-time favorites. Inuyasha, absolute classic. FMA Brotherhood reigned at the top of my anime list for over a decade. 2000s anime was just built different. And one that lingers in the back of my mind at almost all times is Hellsing. It's ultra-violence with religious imagery, sexy vampires, it's full of Nazi killing, which is extremely based and seems very relevant in today's day and age. So today we're drawing the main character, Alucard. I start the vast majority of my artwork in lines, because I feel it helps me get my ideas out the fastest, and I personally find it easier to think in lines rather than big shapes of paint, which some people prefer. It just helps me get the broad strokes down faster without having to worry about color or value. I also feel it's way easier to imply detail with just a few lines rather than implying them using light and dark values while painting. But it's of course all personal preference, and you should do whichever you prefer, whichever is easiest for you. In this sketch, I'm trying to lead all the elements towards Alucard's head and then back out into the rest of the composition to keep the eyes moving around the piece, while eventually leading you back into Alucard's head, which is the focal point. I also think drawing any character with magical abilities is super handy because you can shape the magic in any way you want to suit your composition, unlike something that needs to abide by the laws of physics. Just a very nice little life hack. I did 2 additional sketches to explore some other ideas, but I ultimately settled on this one as I felt it had the best energy. Plus, there's nothing stopping me from going back to the other sketches and finishing those as well if I wanted to. How far I take a sketch before I start coloring varies, but I find that of course, the more of a plan you have, the easier the rest of the painting process becomes. Here I'm laying down some quick base colors and separating them into individual layers for easier masking later in the process. If I was gonna do clean line art for this painting, here is probably where I would do it. But sometimes I feel paintings lose their energy when I do clean lines on the sketch, rather than just painting over the sketch directly. And I suspected this would be the case on this one. After base colors, I move on to mapping out the shadows, which I typically do on a multiply layer. It's one of my favorite ways to work because the multiply layer gives you a semi-accurate shadow color for each color in the piece without having to plan them out manually. If you want to avoid multiply layers and do it all manually, an easy rule of thumb is the halfway to black rule, which, as with everything in art, is really more of a suggestion than a rule, but it states that selecting a color and then going halfway to black on the color picker will give you a somewhat accurate color of what the shadow color should be. Then it of course depends on if you want a cold or warm shadow, and the amount of bounce light or other light sources in your scene. There are a lot of variables to keep in mind, hence why it's more of a suggestion than a rule. After I've mapped out the shadows, I adjust the colors with filters and adjustment layers to see if I can spice things up a bit before I move on to our final and longest step by far, the actual rendering and detailing. This is both my favorite and least favorite part of the process. I love spending hours getting snowed in on a painting and making everything beautiful and removing blemishes and the remains of the sketch, but it of course also takes a long ass time, and sometimes you spend an hour on a detail, you zoom out, and you can't even tell if you made any changes or not. And chances are no one will see or pay attention to those details either. Maybe that's why the YouTube format is actually really nice for artists. This part of the process gets to be shown off a little more, and you can really see each individual detail being worked on, rather than just lost in a blurb of art on Instagram. Not that Instagram is the end-all be-all of art, but in today's day and age, certainly seems to be where the average person consumes it. As I'm rendering the painting, I'm keeping in mind where I map my shadows and where light would fall, staying true to the rest of the lighting in the scene. I'm also keeping detail distribution in mind. I don't want too much detail too far away from focus points, but in this piece I'm also fortunate enough to have the face be the highest contrast area just by design, given it has one of the brightest areas as well as one of the darkest areas right next to it. This leads to a high amount of focus. I'm also a particularly big fan of how the blood turned out. It's really goopy and shiny, and I like that a lot. I think overall this illustration suits Hellsing really well. It's got Alucard's beautiful smile, his love of blood, his puppy, his debonair attitude. Maybe I actually don't care too much about Hellsing, and I just like this hot vampire guy with big guns. Ah shit, I forgot his gun. We're just about done with the painting part, and I'm adding some final touches with filters and adjustment layers again, just to get everything to a nice spot where I want it. And there we have it. I'm really happy with this piece. I think it's got good energy. I love the colors, I love the theme, I love the character. Wouldn't it be really weird if I, at the end of the process, decided I actually wanted to animate this, and I spent 10 hours cutting apart and animating the whole painting into a splash screen type animation, or a VTuber starting soon screen, whichever you prefer? Wouldn't that be so weird? Thank you for watching! The whole painting and animation process for this piece was streamed live on my Twitch channel, on which I'm currently live about 5 days a week doing painting, animation, 3D, art-related things. I hope to see you there, and please subscribe here on YouTube as well.